Okay, let's see what we can do here in terms of, I don't know if you would call this kind of a traditional methodology of stamping out your images and just kind of going back in with markers or something like colored pencils or something like that and filling in, okay? And for all of you kind of non-glossy cardstock stampers, I have right here a non-glossy matte piece of paper, okay? I'm sorry, I don't know what paper I, cut this out of. It just, I had a stack of some quarter-sized pages that I cut off. It's probably cardstock, but I'm not sure. All I know is it's matte. I don't even know what cardstock I have a lot of times, as it's from years ago, unless I had that kind of the ream still. I'm not even sure what it is. It's fairly smooth though, okay? But you can probably do this on, a textured paper as well. There's some fantastic work being done by someone on the Facebook group, and they just use all textured paper. Okay, I'm kind of wiping off the bottom portion of this just so this dotted area kind of transitions out a little bit more gracefully. If you've watched any of my videos, you've been seeing me do that a lot with the cloud stamp especially. Anyways, I'm stamping out the Lakeside Cove here. It's the 048E stamp. And what I'm using here for the scene is Nature Set number 9, but all of these stamps are also available individually. I'll list them in the notes section below. But anyways, as I kind of wipe that off, it just kind of transitions off really nicely. Now, I haven't done this kind of methodology in quite a long time, and I don't do it too often. I probably should, but we'll see what I can come up with here. Anyways, I just did 3 impressions, as you can see. This is the smaller Lakeside Cove version too. So it gives that kind of more distant feel, of course, to the scene. Oh yeah, I forgot I had the pines and rocks. I can use this in the foreground too, or something like that. But I stamped this kind of the lower third in terms of that horizon line, and so this scene will be featuring more of the sky area up here. Okay, so I have the cloud with moon stamp here. And what I'm going to do, I could stamp this out in black, but it's going to have a cool tone to the overall color scheme in here. So I'm just going to give this kind of a head start in terms of my lighting and coloring scheme by coloring the object that is the source of light the same color as the, the overall color of light within the scene. You could, like I said, you could stamp it in black, but one of my, methods that I probably stick to more than anything is whatever the source of light is, be it a sun or moon or something like that, or stars. If it's setting the color scheme for the scene, I do it in a color from that color scheme. So if I'm stamping a sun and it's really low on the horizon, looks like a sunset, and I have oranges and reds, purples, whatever, in that color scheme, I stamp the sun out in that color rather than stamping in black. You could, though. It just gives it a kind of a different feel. All right, now on this one right here, see, I kind of, with sky imagery, it's kind of a good habit to just kind of blot up, the ink around the perimeter. I would say on this one right here, this one's a 2 by 3 inch, roughly, size stamp, so I probably go into it about a 1/2 inch or so. And with a dry paper towel, I just kind of blot off the edges so it just kind of stamps out lighter around that perimeter, and thus transitions off that design into the surrounding area a little bit more gracefully. And this, I don't know if I'll be using it on this one, but especially if I stamped out my cloud stamp around it, it would transition into the sibling designs really nicely. So you can see right here, it just kind of fades off. And that way, if you're stamping out your imagery, especially in dark colors, you don't get so much of this rectangular format of it, okay? And it just kind of fades out. So it'll fade into a neighboring design, or in this case, it just kind of fades out like that, so it's easy to just blend in that surrounding area. I know on this one right here, I haven't done this for a long time in terms of just kind of filling in my area with color. And I don't know, it wouldn't be bad to kind of have some perimeter textures in there. I'm looking on my desk right now. I'm seeing if I do have my cloud stamp out. It's around here somewhere. I've been using it a lot lately. But I don't know. We can just stick with nature set number 9 here as well. Okay, so we have some other things in here. Why not? I might as well use this. This is a bit of the lily stamp, okay? And I'm just going to do this in black. And we'll get a couple of these little surface-oriented textures in the composition. Something like that. And let's go with the reeds. The reeds, and this one is the small version. And I'm just using dye-based inks right here, by the way. Now, a lot of times, or most of the time, I kind of don't stamp my foreground until the end after I've applied all my colors in here. Let's work a little bit differently this time, because I think I'm going to color this with alcohol markers, right? And I'm just not quite sure how dye-based ink over alcohol markers would work, even if I use the VersaFine. Well, the VersaFine wouldn't be dye-based, it would be pigment. But it might not stamp out as cleanly on top of, you know, a lot of built-up alcohol marks in here. So let's just do it this way, and we'll see how it goes. And okay, let's do this too. Why not? This is the migration image. And I'll just do that in black as well. So this is just kind of setting your composition up completely, and it's going in with color. This would be a perfect candidate for, you know, colored pencils or something like that, or chalks or pastels or something of that sort. I think this way of stamping, in a lot of ways, it's kind of more of a comfortable notion for people. Okay, now it's missing all of the you know, the layering of tone and everything like that, but I think people can see the compositional aspects of how to build a scene sometimes when you know, if I'm demonstrating it this way, than just doing like two things and then filling in color and then stamping something out. You know, sometimes people, you know, by the time it gets to the end, if I was doing this in a demonstration, they would say, okay, now wait, when did they add the color and when did they add, you know, the foreground and all that? And that's understandable too. So sometimes it's just kind of easier just to get everything stamped out and to just color like that. It's basically 2 steps or something of that sort. If they were doing it like that, they would just, you know, have to remember, okay, if you stamp out the moon lighter or in the color that, you know, is going to be overall in the color scheme, then say these birds right here that are in front of it, stamped in black, just stand out a little bit more as a result too. All right. Okay, so our composition is laid out. Now, I am no authority on what I'm going to be doing next. Okay, I mean, I've done it before, but let's just fill in with color. Now, I do stick with my same kind of general process of starting with lighter tones and working darker when I do this. I mean, you know, there's all kinds of different ways to do it, I'm sure. And I'm just kind of sticking to a process that I'm really comfortable with and familiar with. And that's laying down light tones and just kind of building them up darker. All right, now, just like dye-based inks, alcohol colors are transparent, okay? So the colors that you lay down underneath are going to be showing through the colors that you lay down over the top of it. Now, I have done a lesson where I've done this process on glossy paper as well, and that has its own look to it, which I really like. But let's just go in here. Okay, now here's the thing too. I'm going to adhere to my... Now this is a really light blue. This one's called pale blue. Perfect name for that, right? I'm going to stick with my general concept of lighting as well as color applications and values. So if I want that light to be reflecting off the surface of this water, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to color everything out in that water, okay? And I like starting from the outside and just kind of working my way in like this. Okay, now I didn't wait for this ink to dry, so it is dragging in a little bit of that black, but not too bad. And just in general, alcohol doesn't mix with water, so it's not really smearing the ink in terms of putting it back into solution. There's just some areas on there where the black just didn't dry, which gives me the impression that this is probably cardstock as opposed to just a non-coated paper. Alright, let me be really careful about going over these birds. I see a slight tinge of a smearing, but it's really not too bad. So in other words, I don't know. I don't think you have to really wait for too long. So see this? I'm just kind of coming in from the outside edge and just streaking that color in. I do think that this ink, although it's very, very light, too, is it's kind of saturating the paper a little bit. Well, it's not saturating it, but it's making that paper surface and pulp of the paper, maybe that's more important, a little bit moist, so that when I get into my darker tones, you know, I think I can get kind of a smoother application, one that I can kind of blend out. Okay. Going around my moon, I'm being careful not to tone out my moon. But here's one of those things. Say, when I do it this way, just like I do with dye-based inks, when I'm applying inks with like the stylus tools or whatnot, if I start off really light, it's really easy to kind of establish a lighting scheme because you're not making a big commitment to any hue because you're going with such a light version of it. So I tend to use a lot of that, you know, very light shades of things. Alright, now, I don't have as much control over my application amount of color. So let me see, let me test out my next color. This one right here is a aquamarine, so I'm trying not to make a big jump from something that's light to something that's significantly darker if I don't have to. I mean, you certainly can. I'm working on a matte paper. If I was working on a glossy cardstock where the ink would kind of hover more or lay on the surface more than getting absorbed, I can kind of go back in with a darker tone and add that in there. And then I can go back in with a lighter one and kind of blend it out. But this one's, you know, it's saturating it more. So if I don't have to, I don't want to make too big of a jump. So this one, see right here, it's not too big of a value jump from that previous color. See, it's just a slight tinge darker, okay? Now this color is still fairly light in value, so you know you can use quite a bit of it. And what I'm going to start doing is I'll start to vary the application a little bit, because I like things a little bit more kind of oscillated between light and dark tones. Okay. So in other words, you know, and if you look in the sky, you see those striations of different color bands and different values. I think that looks really good in a sky type of setting, so I'm applying my inks accordingly to try and get some kind of gist or some version of it. Who knows, maybe in the this marker method, maybe I can achieve a little bit more of like a, almost like a brush stroke type of look to the end result. Okay, same thing down here in the water. If you want that kind of water to be reflecting some of that cast light from the moon, then leave some of it lighter. See, in here I kind of filled up, but on the water where it's reflecting that moonlight, I'll just try to leave, you know, some of that area a little bit lighter. Again, keep in mind that, you know, I just don't do this. I mean, I get the process and everything like that and kind of what I'm going after, but my control over it is, I don't know, rather minimal. So I'm just kind of, you know, sticking to my, you know, the process and the concept of it. And I know that when laying down dye-based inks, you know, a lot of times I just kind of keep working on it. If I don't like something, you know, it's not so much a matter of kind of going astray and not doing something right. It's just a matter of adding more, okay? So this right here, as I start doing it, I'm starting to feel on the surface right here, that buildup of alcohol ink. So I can tell it's starting to build up on the surface a little bit because probably the pulp of the paper is getting a little bit saturated with that ink. So that's a good thing though too. Okay, that was, what was that again? Was it aquamarine? Yeah, aquamarine. These are Marvy Laplumes, by the way. I just have these two sets here. Someone sent me that. That was out in Japan before. I mean, you can get these anywhere, but you probably have Copics or something like that. That's probably the most popular, you know, the alcohol ink brands. And this one right here is a shuttle art. This is a 88 color set that I also have. So I'm working all of them because, you know, one set didn't have, you know, a full range of these blue values in there. But together I can kind of get a pretty nice range without having to jump, you know, between one value and the next, you know, too extremely. Now, if you have a blending pen too, yeah, I think I have one. I'll use that in here because it's getting a little bit streaky because this one right here goes quite a bit darker. Okay, now on these rocks, I'm coloring these rocks, but I'm not coloring all of them, so it looks like the kind of the light is hitting some of those rocks on the top surfaces of them. So on the design itself, when you stamp it out, you'll see these darker areas on the rocks, like around in the shadows right in here, or on the base of the rock, but on the top of the rock I've left them lighter, so you can kind of take your cues as far as, you know, possible shading or shaded areas, or what areas that you can kind of enhance the shading with additional tone by just, you know, referencing the designs themselves and saying, okay, the top of that is light, I'll just leave it light. All right, now, where I mentioned this is getting a little bit streaky, let's go back with the lighter one now and just kind of blend in. One of the kind of the interesting things with alcohol inks is that you can kind of, in some ways, if it's starting to build up a little bit on you, going back into it with a lighter tone can, in a way, put the inks back into solution a little bit. It's a little bit harder on matte paper because of the absorbency factor, but on here, I can kind of go back in here and soften some of these edges on here of the darker inks, but it also puts the inks back into solution so you can kind of blend them a little bit more, and that's where your blending pen, of course, comes into play. So right over here I can tell that it's really kind of making it lighter by going back over it with a lighter pen, but this is what I do on dye-based inks as well. I'll just kind of go back in some areas sometimes with some lighter tones and just add another layer occasionally. You can't make it really lighter, but you can kind of blend out some of the other colors. I don't do that too often, but sometimes. Okay, so here's this, what is this? Pastel blue. It's quite a bit brighter than, the inks that I've laid down on here. But let's go into some of these shadow areas. Sometimes the brightest colors, okay? Not the lightest, but the brightest, brightest is referring to the intensity of a color. Sometimes the brightest colors are in the shadows because they're not being kind of washed out by light hitting them, okay? And I'm just kind of adding this into the shadow area, about like so. You see that little kind of shot of intensity in there? Okay. And you can just go through, I mean, I have various values of things. Some of these blues are going into a little bit more of the violet tones. You add a slight tinge of a little bit of red or, pink into blue, and you're moving it in that direction. You can move it into more of a turquoise direction too. Okay, this is just going on with sky blue. This kind of blue is almost the same color as that color that I stamped into the clouds. Maybe I can get a little of this in there too. I don't like how it looks like that, but what I'll do is I'll blend it out. Let me see. I almost never use this blender, but I just saw it somewhere. This one right here. Yeah, it's just called Blender. So I take that darker color and I just kind of blend it in a little bit. Actually, it's like erasing it in this case. There's so much. I never use this, so there's so much of that just toner in there. See that? Okay, this is really cutting into it. That color that the colors that I've laid down there. I really like that kind of watercolory looking texture. So this kind of, it goes in there and it really separates the color. See that? As it kind of removes that. I really love that look. And now as I kind of wipe it like that, I'm kind of removing some of the ink that's sticking to that tip right there. Actually, this is actually my answer. My answer to some of these areas in here. It just kind of, this thing is like really like acting like an eraser. But it's giving me that kind of that cool, I don't know how it, but that separated watercolory looking tinge. Okay, let's, I was talking about moving into a kind of a little bit of a different color scheme too, or tint. Let's do some more of that in here. Let's try the, what is this one? Cosmos. Do I have much more pale yellow, pink here? Here's a, can't read that. Pale, oh, okay, pale pink. Let me see this one. Here's more pale. Yeah, this one's a little bit more pale. This pen cost 50 cents, by the way. They all did in that 88 color set. Well, it was 88 colors for $40, so I don't know, less than 50 cents. Okay, so this is going in and just adding that little tinge. Maybe I won't add it everywhere. Where you overlap blue, it looks more violet, and where you go into more of this straight white, or I don't know if I have straight white there, it just, it looks a little more pink, so getting those little bit of variations in here. And if that color is down in the water, it stands to reason that, you know, my light source up here is the thing that's casting that. So let's put some of this into the sky as well. Unlike a watercolorist who really knows what they're doing and kind of, you know, is able to lay down their colors very confidently with knowledge, that's kind of the opposite thing of what I'm doing here. But it's not for, you know, because of technique, it's because of my, you know, lack of experience doing that. So keep that in mind. So I'm kind of working this, and, you know, like a watercolorist would look at me doing something like this and trying to reference that type of look and just kind of cringe, I'm sure, because, you know, you don't want to overwork something. So this is just kind of me compensating for that aspect. This is gray right here, just some sort of medium gray, and going into my shadows right here and my rocks, and just kind of rendering these a little bit more with shadow areas. Where do you do shadows, okay, when it comes to objects? Well, if something is being top lit, then kind of on the bottom half of something is something that I would shade. Like, I can go like this, and you can see, you know, my hand right here is lighter up here, and it's darker down here. It's relatively, you know, similar in tone, right? But you can see the shadows in here, right? Okay, so I have my lights coming from above, and I mean, it's coming. This isn't a great example because in my little table area right here, I have two sources of light coming in from the side, but I think you get the idea. So just, you know, think about things in terms of them being three-dimensional objects as opposed to an outline or something like that, okay? So if this was a rock being lit from right here, then, you know, I would probably put my shadows down here, like something like that. And then I would put it down below here like this or something, you know, just to anchor it. And that's what's happening kind of in these rock areas down here, like so. I mean, I have colors in there too, because, you know, shadows aren't just gray or something like that. They're typically darker versions of whatever you're working with. You know, whatever color scheme is being cast in there. Okay, so let's take a look right here and see these different striations. This is a big area. This isn't a great example for me to do because I had so much area to fill in here, but you can see the variation that's happening within there. There's not a lot of change in values that are happening in here, but I wonder if I could go in here. Let's use some of this cosmetic brush right here. A lot of people are starting to get these types of things. Let's see what we can do here and work in some additional tone, because I do want some additional tones in here, but let's see what we can come up with in terms of some kind of process. Now, like I said before, stamping some image on the top of this with dye-based inks may or may not work, but I'll see if I can put some kind of layering of additional tone on here. Okay, so I don't know, I'm just playing around with these things like this, okay? Okay, that looks pretty good, doesn't it? Okay. See, like that right there? Now, if I wipe that right there, it might just kind of wipe off because that tone is laid on there, but I don't know, it looks pretty good. If this is your first video that you've ever seen from me, well, if this is your first video, you probably wouldn't be watching at this point in time with me scumbling around and just kind of finding my way. But this is definitely just a, kind of a turn on the camera, exploratory type of video where it's just me experimenting and hitting record. So it's not like a, you know, demonstration video by any means, where I'm teaching you how to do something. I'm kind of teaching, you know, myself here, or eliminating certain types of processes for sure. By the way, this is Danube Blue, the Memento. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. To me, I don't know how not a huge, interesting, dynamic look here yet, but the fact that I can lay this down on top of the over the top of all that alcohol ink, you know, is kind of a nice. I don't know if you call it a revelation, but it's nice to see, at least. It feels quite a bit different, and of course I'm working on, you know, a matte paper here too, so maybe that plays into it, you know, the fact that it's not so sealed off. So see what I'm doing? I'm pulling this in from the outside edge, like I would on glossy paper or something like that. I should try something here. Maybe I will. I asked someone what blue they used on a certain scene that they posted on Facebook, and I forgot what exact blue they had, but they said it was a VersaFine. If it was the Majestic blue, then I have it, which I was shocked. I found it in my demo inks. In a box in storage. Okay, this is the Prussian blue, so this is the ink that I stamped out my moon in. Let's use that same color to blend in right here. Prussian blue is really, really dark at times. It's not so dark here, though, interestingly enough. It's a little bit lighter. I think it's because it's the amount of ink that I'm kind of working into this. Okay, now some of these areas on here, I feel it's a little bit more resistant to the ink application. You see, I ran this completely across right there, but you can see it only applied right there. It's not applying in this area, so it's a little bit, that alcohol ink on the surface is a little bit resistant, which is not terribly bad because it's creating kind of a textured surface, you know, that doesn't go against the spirit of that kind of more streaky, you know, application of color that I did with the pens. Like, you know, see, this is interesting here. See that little thing, that little loop thing right there? That's, as I go across there, it's kind of catching right there, so it's absorbing into it. But doesn't that look great for the water in terms of texture? See these different kind of textures that are kind of revealing themselves as I go along here. It's almost like I applied some sort of resist underneath this water-based ink, you know, on top of the alcohol. Okay. All right. I already went with the Danube blue. Okay, let's... Why not? Let's try this pigment ink. Do I want to do that? This scares me a little bit because it says, I forget, you know, it says instant dry pigment ink. Okay, let me go on with a little bit of this black first here. Let's go with this one first, and then add the other one over the top of it. Okay, I'll just add a little bit of this on my four corners to create a little bit of a vignette. It's not going to be a strong vignette, I can see, because it is just not wanting to apply on there. It's interesting, this black feels completely different. Oh, maybe that ink that I just applied over the top of that alcohol ink, it feels, suddenly this whole thing feels really tacky. You can see it's getting on my fingers here. So the ink that I'm applying is just really sticking on the surface. Maybe the Memento is a little bit more gel-like in thickness, so it's not, it's spread a little bit easier. Let me see how this works here. This thing, I don't remember when I got this, where I got this, why it was in the demo box, but it is still really juicy. It has to be. It had to have been in storage for 10 years at least. Because it came back from either a workshop or convention demonstration. All right, that's not working. It's way too thick. Okay, let me try to get some of this ink out of there. It's looking real blotchy. I wonder what would happen if I went back in with the alcohol inks over the top of that now. God. Do we want to do that? Hard to say. Okay, let me go back to the Danube blue and let me try to blend that out a little bit. Boy, this is getting really sticky. Oh. I put water on here, right, to just kind of clean it out. And it's just putting that ink right back into solution, the VersaFine, because it is a, water-based ink. So it's allowing me to really spread that out. Oh, and it's wiping off the other inks that I laid, the dye-based inks that I laid down on there. That's interesting. Okay. Let's see if we can work that then. It's ink forgiveness. Yeah, look at that. It's almost like it's like bleaching it almost. This is almost acting like oh, okay, that looks really cool. So I'm going, here's what's happening here. This is what I'm guessing from doing this. Okay, so we laid down alcohol inks, okay? The dye-based inks that we put on top of it did not penetrate those alcohol ink sealed areas. So it's kind of more surface oriented. So if I'm going back over it with like this, I can remove or lighten some of those applications with the dye-based ink. Okay, so with this, I mean, you can do whatever tool. I just happen to be using this one. So going back in here, like so, it's kind of blending really nicely those inks. This is almost like an eraser here too, so it's giving me some good textures. I'm kind of out of control up here in this area right here, but kind of in this area right down here. Look how nice that is. That's kind of what I was going for with the alcohol pens, but kind of building up some additional tones and going multimedia. See those variations in here of soft kind of transitions and how it has that, I don't know, it's hard to explain, that watery look. Up here, I'm not getting it so much because I put that VersaFine in there. I'd have to kind of scrub it out. Actually, it's coming out a little bit. Okay, here it is. I'm just kind of having to put it back into solution with enough water. There wasn't enough water, so I guess instant dry on top of alcohol inks, it does go back into solution in some ways. Alright, so anyway, you see that right there? Those transitions and whatnot. Now I guess you can constantly work this. You can go with some more. I can, go back with some additional inks, and then you can kind of work it a little bit and whatnot. Might be kind of interesting as a process. It's certainly kind of fun to do. It's fun to be able to manipulate the colors that you've already laid down, and that's not easy to do. That's why a lot of times I just kind of have to keep doing an additive process in terms of adding different effects by going back in with light on dark. Okay, let's do that right here. Let's take some of this little Q-tip right here. And I'm kind of loosening it, okay, like this. Don't completely unravel it because you want it to have a little bit of cushion like that. So when you start tapping it down, you're just not kind of banging on the stick area of it. And let's see what we can do here. But hopefully this, I don't know, I can kind of develop this into, I don't know, a technique that I can apply in the future with a little bit more control, but I do like that, you know, that ability to just go back in with, you know, whatever applicator you're using. You can use these or stylus tools, and if you wet them, going back in and moving your dye-based inks around like that, you know, I mean, that would be an amazing ability if you can kind of manipulate dye-based inks as you would, say, maybe with alcohol inks using a blender. So you can use the alcohol inks with a blender laid down there, blend them around, and then add some dye-based inks on the surface where it's kind of, I don't know, I call it a floating application of dye-based inks that you can thus manipulate as well using water. And that water, where you move it around, shouldn't manipulate the alcohol inks because the water and the alcohol don't mix again. So two different layers that you can manipulate in different ways on the same surface. I don't know, it's something I'd have to kind of play around with a bit. Some of that is watercolors or something like that. There's some amazing stampers out there that are really fantastic with watercolors. That would be, it'd be probably be a little bit more intuitive for them that are kind of familiar with manipulating kind of wet media in a much faster way to get the results they want, or the looks they're going after. Okay, I'm adding some of this down here in this water area, kind of around my rocks. Some of these trees that are a little bit, represent trees a little bit farther off in the distance that are kind of closer to an area that's still a little bit lighter. I'm kind of adding a really thin layer of this right over the top of it. Okay, and that represents kind of distance, or it could represent fog, or whatever, but the fog that's kind of in between the viewer and that, you know, object, as far as where, you know, the distance it represents kind of happens at once. So the foggier the situation, the lighter, the more distant things are, because of the light reflecting off a more distant object has to travel through more of that suspended moisture in the air, and the object keeps breaking up in terms of light coming back to you. Not that you need to know that, but what I'm just saying is kind of in a lighter area you can kind of apply more of this, you know, and it seems to make sense from a visual standpoint. Okay, so let me show you what's going on here. So I've kind of blotted off a very thin layer of this around the moon, and get a little bit too blotchy there, and just kind of, you can move this around. Don't do this with the brilliance ink. You can with some good results, but it takes a little bit more control because brilliance dries real fast. So I'm just using the Hero Hues one. You can use your color box, or just about every other ink, pigment ink that's not brilliance, that's, you know, designed to dry really fast. But seeing it has a kind of misty, diffused look, and down here that was stamped out in black, but I've blotted over a little bit of it down there and in the water, and it looks more distant, doesn't it? Because they're lighter in value. Okay, so anyways, just a little experiment here with some inks. I'm looking at the transitions right in here in terms of the different colors that were used and how they were used. And down here in the water, so see that right here, I just kind of almost like bleached that whole thing out. I didn't really bleach it, it just kind of put that ink back into solution in these areas right here, but it's kind of a combination of kind of diffusion and slightly more definitive marks and whatnot with the alcohol inks, you know, sub marks underneath that dye-based inks. I don't know, you know, I mean, it looks pretty cool to me. This isn't a great example of it, of course. Someone, you know, if I had control over it, or someone that has control over that type of application, you know, would be able to do much better than I just did right there. But kind of just discovering some of the different, not possibilities, but potential of that type of process right there. And I think that does have potential, and I'll have to kind of think about that again in the future in terms of kind of floating layers of ink on top of one another. What would it look like for, you know, to lay dye-based inks underneath and then to put the alcohol on top, you know? I couldn't put the, make the dye-based inks go back into solution, but I'd be able to use the blender pens over the top of that very easily, though. So that would probably be a completely different look than this one. In terms of the marks, you know, dye-based inks being sealed off with alcohol, or alcohol laid down with a floating layer of dye-based inks on top. I don't know, it might yield similar types of looks, but the concept would be completely different in terms of the that type of layering. So I'm just thinking out loud here. It was fun, and I do like the look, and some of these looks up here, especially I especially like it right in here. When I applied this, it was really sopping wet, and I just kind of went like that and kind of, you know, smooshed it around, and I can see that kind of dye-based ink coming off in a very soft removal of that ink in that area. It didn't remove it 100%, but it just kind of pushed a little bit off to the side, you know, with the water getting put back into solution like that. So I do like the look. Let's experiment with it a little bit more in the future. And I don't know, kind of play around with these different media compositions, dye-based, alcohol, pigment, and whatnot. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning into the channel, as always.